Great, welcome everybody. I'm Emily Jones, I'm an associate professor here at the Blavatnik School of Government, and I'll be chairing the panel this morning on a very important topic of how can we build cohesive and diverse societies and encourage representative government. Before I say a few words about the topic and introduce our panelists, I'd like to ask Zara, who's one of our MPP students, to pose a question that will frame our debate and discussion this morning, and which we'll return to at the end and make sure we've answered. Zara, over to you.
Thank you, Emily. Distinguished panelists, my question to you is this. What does cohesion practically mean? And what are the tangible hallmarks of a cohesive and diverse society?
I promised you a challenging question. I think you've just had one. So I'm going to ask our panelists this morning to touch on three specific issues. One is the question about how do we ensure that women have a voice in policy making and government? And just to remind you, on average across the world, women comprise only 23% of parliamentarians. There's a very diverse range. In a country like Kuwait, I think it's 1.5% of parliamentarians are women. Here in the UK, 29% of parliamentarians are women. In Rwanda, it's 64%. So there's a huge diversity. The second issue is then how we build cohesive and representative societies in countries that are very diverse, particularly in terms of religion and ethnicity. Again, just speaking from the UK's experience here, 13% of our population identifies or self-identifies as an ethnic minority, but only 6% of our MPs. And that's a sort of trend we see around the world where ethnic minorities are underrepresented in formal government bodies. And thirdly, on immigration. So if you've opened the headlines or the newspaper today in the UK, we've now got new data that there's a high number of EU workers in the UK. It's reached the highest level ever, and it's, of course, one of the most explosive points around the debate about whether the UK should leave Europe. And it's migration and incorporating migrants into society is a huge challenge across the world. And we have four really distinguished and expert panelists, and I'm delighted to introduce them. And I'll introduce them in the order in which they're going to speak. Our first panelist is Dato Nazir Razak, who's chairman of the CIMB group, which is now one of a leading bank in ASEAN. And you spearheaded the change, Nazir, from a Malaysian investment bank to one of ASEAN's largest universal banks, which is now the fifth largest in the ASEAN region, I understand. And your bank has won a series of awards, as have you, and you're recognized as one of Malaysia's top business people. And we are thrilled as well to have you as the school's advisory board, where you play a leading role, and we're very grateful for your contribution to our school. Our second speaker will be Dato Sabariah Hassan. Sabariah is the Secretary General for Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development in Malaysia. She's worked in the Malaysian government for more than 30 years, I understand. And you're one of 6 women who have reached the level of Secretary General out of 25 ministries in Malaysia. Yeah. So we'd like you to share a few of your insights from that experience. Thank you. Rola Dashti, a leading civil society activist from the Middle East, who's campaigned very strongly for women's rights in particular, and played a pivotal role in securing the 2005 decree, which enabled women in Kuwait to vote for the first time. And she was one of the first 4 women parliamentarians in Kuwait. And you just shared a picture with me from 11 years ago when you've won the right to vote. And if we get a chance, we'll project it up onto the screen. And you're currently chairing an international consultancy firm, and you've been recognized internationally for your work on women's rights campaigning. And our fourth panelist is Hewstone, who's here in Oxford as a professor of social psychology. And you've published widely in the field of experimental social psychology and looking at prejudice and stereotyping, at intergroup contact, and how you reduce intergroup conflict, and particularly in Northern Ireland, I understand, and sectarianism in Northern Ireland. And as a hallmark of people associated with the Blavatnik School, you've done a lot of work advising the UK government on public policy. So it'd be wonderful to hear a little bit about the research, as well as policy advice you've been given. So Nazir, let me turn to you, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to speak for about 4 or 5 minutes to kick off. Obviously, Malaysia is a very diverse country, so perhaps you'd like to share a few insights from what Malaysia's done to promote diversity, and then some insights from across the ASEAN region.
Thank you, Emily, and as you know, I'm a banker, so please don't take me as an expert on this subject. But when I look at diversity, to me, it's a double-edged sword. and it's all about blunting the enormous potential it has for collision, tensions, and sharpening the edge that it has for greater productivity, viz. Cooperation, working together, and so on and so forth. And it's a perpetual challenge. If you look at ASEAN today, Singapore, for all its huge economic success, managing diversity is still very much high on the top of the government's agenda. If you look at Indonesia, where they had a policy of assimilation on independence, during the depth of the Asian financial crisis, the Chinese community were persecuted. And so it's a perpetual challenge. When you look at the potential of diverse societies, I look at it from a corporate perspective, how I operate in the bank. I tell staff, one is managing diversity or exploiting diversity is all about telling people to go against what comes naturally. There's a natural human bias for one's own kind, not just in ethnic terms, but also in terms of religion or upbringing. And we see teams in the organization that are diverse in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of backgrounds, doing much better than homogeneous teams. I mean, that's fact. So we actually have, at the management level, we actually intervene and not allow homogeneous teams. And we have certain rules in the organization about best practices for managing diversity, like we restrict what languages you can speak in the organization for fear of avoiding or upsetting people. When you look at it from a government perspective, I think different situations require different interventions from on the part of the government. And let me share with you the sort of Malaysian experience. And Malaysia is quite an extreme situation in the sense that what we call the indigenous people, or the Bumiputras, constitute 2/3 of the population. And 60% of the population are Muslims. Then there's roughly 25% Chinese and less than 10% others. So it's a very diverse society in that sense. And we have a political and economic system that's actually built on recognizing and actually entrenching ethnic differences. And this is characterized by strong government, race-based political parties, vernacular schools, affirmative action policies on the economic front. But when you look at Malaysia today, certainly much more successful than the Sri Lanka experience, where they have 75% indigenous, although the argument is who's actually indigenous, but 75% are Sinhalese, and it descended into civil war. Whereas Malaysia is considered a economic success. But the way I look at Malaysia today is that it's a system under stress. One is diversity is actually being exploited to dominate the political discourse, and I think it drowns out debate on more substantive policy issues. And I think Miles quoted, I was reading one of Miles's papers recently, and Miles quoted that in a recent survey, 2013, that 73% of our minorities actually feel that the system is unfair. 60% of our minorities would immigrate given the opportunity to do so. Yeah. So the way I look at Malaysia, we have a system to manage diversity, and that was the introduction of affirmative action policies in 1970 and a few other things. And that system has actually run its course and is under stress. So the point I wanted to make is managing diversity also means that you continuously have to review your formula because situations change. And some of the the affirmative action policies that were accepted by the diverse population in 1970 is not really accepted by the new Malaysians today, who are asking the questions, why do we keep being identified as minorities or by our ethnic identity as opposed to as Malaysians? So let me wrap by just saying that, we need different policies for different situations, but perhaps I'd share with you my perspective of some of the proposed do's and don'ts in doing so. One is Malaysia introduced vernacular schools at the time of independence, and that is actually one of the worst decisions Malaysia ever made, because our children don't grow up together. So I totally take the point that vernacular schools, some of them are actually very good, but I think the downside of children not growing up together is enormous. Two is extreme imbalances, like we had at the time, the early days of Malaysia, where the 2/3 of the population own 2% of the corporate wealth. Those kind of extreme balances need to be managed or rebalanced. And I am okay with affirmative action, but I wish someone would tell us how to make affirmative action a finite, right? Or how to undo affirmative action once you've introduced it. And this also goes to the point about women, because today Malaysia is introducing a 30% quota for women on boards, etc., which I am for, but I just worry about the long-term downsides of quotas. Political representation is absolutely essential for all groups, minorities, etc., etc. But I am not ethnicity-based political parties, and definitely not religion-based political parties. So perhaps one point is to ask who's got a better idea of how there can be representation. And finally, legal framework is very important in a country like Malaysia, where we have very diverse race. Believe it or not, we have no definition of racism. Yeah, I remember growing up here in the UK in the 80s, where when you went to watch a football match, people still threw bananas onto the field. And today, football is actually taking the lead in terms of attacking racism. Right? And that, in part, has also been driven by the legal framework about what is racism, what isn't. And I think it's very, very important that one defines it and legislates against racism as part of the overall formula. And finally, in terms of integrating societies, we talked in the earlier session about having multiple identities. I fully agree with that. But it is very, very hard work. And you mustn't suppress identities, you must push for multiple identities. Yeah. Let me start with that. Thank you
very much. Some really thought-provoking comments there. I wanted to press you just a little bit before I turn to Sabariah on the question of, from the business perspective, why diversity? You said it sort of improves business performance, but why is that? What can we learn from government and public policy from that experience in business?
No, I think it's simple. What business function doesn't benefit from diverse thinking, right? And if you look at a sales process, having a diverse group of salespeople actually adds to your potential sales, period.
So it's different perspectives and what they bring to the table.
For sure. And you look at the Malaysian economy as a whole, our biggest upside as a diverse society is actually our connection with China and a connection with India, connection with the Middle East, because of the diaspora that exists in Malaysia. And rather than creating a situation where people want to migrate, we should create a situation where they are deeply vested in the country's economy.
Great, thank you, Sabariah. Let's turn to you and hear a little bit of your perspective, both on sort of Malaysia's government policies, but also your own experience, if you wouldn't mind, as a leading woman in the Malaysian government.
Thank you, Emily. Actually, I think I should say thank you to Dato Nazir, talking about the woman diversity in terms of the more women participate or more people, I mean, multiracial, multi-ethnic in a company or in the corporate sector. But I'm looking at the even in the government sector, we have the policy because we believe that everyone should not be left alone. This is in line with the development goal, the second development goal, where sustainable development goal, sorry. So that everyone have to be inclusive in your planning. For example, Malaysia have a very fortunate, I would say fortunate, because from the history, I think that most of us knew our history. We were colonized by the English people for more over than 100 years. So these English people, they divide and rules for the Malaysian population. I have to say that because maybe we can learn something from this. So they divide the Malay in the agriculture, the Chinese in the economy, industrial economy, and the Indian in the plantation. So based on the three three sectors that people identify, this is the Malay must be in the public sector, or in the rural area, the Chinese in the urban, and the Indian in the estate area. So but the based on this segregation, so the government come up with a new policy because May 13, 1969 really taught us of how we want to involve everybody, the citizen of Malaysia, to be involved in the economy, education, and social activity. So the policy from the 1970s to look into we are not looking at the race, but we are looking at the citizen of Malaysia. So this policy was embedded in our system and in every Malaysian plan. Yeah, we have the Malaysia 5 Malaysian plan and embedded, and we have the national vision policy, which is toward 2020, set by the Tun Mahathir, our former Prime Minister. So this policy was embedded until the 11 Malaysia plan, which we are talking about. Nobody should be denied of their accessibility, or denied in health, denied in education, and what and so on. So this policy we carried out, and we involve all the population to be together to build a country. So that's why now we talk about the One Malaysia. Yeah, One Malaysia, meaning that we don't care, we don't divide you in terms of religion, we don't divide you into race, but we are Malaysian. So I think based on this, I think the diversity of Malaysia managed to so-called identify or move forward, so that we can be together to develop Malaysia to be in high income toward 2020. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps I could just ask you to reflect a little bit briefly on Nazir's comments around affirmative action and actually needing to end it perhaps now, and to change the sort of problems that have arisen with vernacular-based schooling. Because it does seem to fly in the face of the sort of One Malaysia, we are Malaysian. So how do you sort of square that from a government perspective?
Okay. In terms of vernacular school, they are more modernized. They are not only teaching the religion, but also they are teaching mathematics, science, and all the subject matter. So religion is maybe about 2 or 3 subjects, but the rest is the maths, science, history, geography, and same as other schools. Only that they emphasize on the religion, 2 or 3 subjects. So from this vernacular school, but now I think toward the at present, people tend to send more their children to the religious school, because they have both balance between religion and also science subject.
Perhaps this is a theme we can come back to during the questions and answers. Great. Rola, let's turn to you and hear from your perspective and all the changes that you fought for and successfully won in Kuwait, and perhaps some reflections on sort of where we're going now with women's rights in the Middle East.
Thank you very much, Emily. Just as Emily was saying, 2 days ago we celebrated our Women's Day for granting women political rights in Kuwait in May 16. I think the issue of women engagement in politics in the Middle East is rising with lots of challenges. There's no question about it. We've granted our rights in 2005. In 2009, women were in parliament. Now we have a little bit of regression. We don't have in this parliament any women except one which is a cabinet member. But the outcome is from our social change in a conservative country like Kuwait is small, but deep-rooted conservatism in it. Religions played a big role against granting us our political rights. So we had to fight against culture. We have to fight against religion. We have to fight against media that was negative to women, unintentionally or intentionally. We had to fight against education curriculum that shaped women in a certain perception and its role in society. And we have to do a social change, society change of role of women within society. And in the midst of this struggle, which I participated out of the 45 years of this struggle, 20 years of my life, it wasn't easy. Because small network society, you start to be terrorized psychologically. Sure, didn't happen that somebody killed us or we were jailed like in other countries, but we were terrorized very much psychologically in a sense that we were labeled as agent of the West, we were labeled as destroyer of society, we were labeled as against family, just because we were asking for women to participate and be part of the society and shaping the future of its country. So when we're talking about cohesion, did we feel we belonged? No. Did we feel we participated in our future? No. Did we feel we had equal opportunity? No. We were recognized. Yes, we had a nationality, but we were not citizens in real terms. So our recognition were not even. So to us, we form women in Kuwait or all over the world, we form almost 50% of the society, but we're not citizens in real terms. And here is what more, you have your education and then what? If I can't shape and participate in the future of my nation, I have a voice. See, that word voice, for people who were raised and born that having it to voice and choose not to vote or something, it's normal. For people who don't have it, it was a big thing. Because you can't say a word about your future. You can't express who will represent you. Even if you're not the parliamentarian, but you just want to feel that I chose, there's a legitimacy for whoever is representing me, or he's speaking, even whatever that outcomes are. So we had to fight, and we went through various battles. From, as I told you, all this terrorism, that psychological terrorism that we went through, to become real citizens that have rights and obligations to the state, to feel belonging, to have the country tolerant, cohesion, it has its representation. And we luckily, May 16, 2005, women had their political rights. But the second step was, it didn't finish there. You have the voice. Second step was, women will not be elected maybe after 50 years. Society is not ready. And actually, we had some conservative, extremist, Islamist MPs were saying, if you grant women their political rights and they let them vote, we will have adultery. I don't know why, but because like you're going to vote, there will be adultery. And you can have crazy things coming up to you and the social fabric. But the second phase was, we had to run and to break the social fabric in terms of society gives vote and have a trust in women. So we had to campaign and we don't have party systems in Kuwait, so you run independent. We have political affiliations. So you have the liberals and the familiars networks, they have their own people. You have the tribalists, which have they collect their own people. You have the Islamists, they have their own representative. So you're women independent, and you have to break all of this at the same time. And we have what we call in Kuwait called Diwaniya. This is the network where you go to reach out for voters. And this is only men club. Women usually don't go to these Diwaniyas. So we had, and everybody say, how does women campaign and we reach the voters? So we had to break the Diwaniya thing. Me and my other friends, colleagues, we said, we have to move in. We have to tell the society that women can have an ideas, can have thoughts, can participate in the decision making, and have a platform like men, and they are capable of also making rules and regulations and be members of parliament. First time, 2006 was the election. We ran, a group of us. We weren't successful, but we break through various things. We had number of votes. Everybody was thinking, I had the highest number of votes at that time. When society was polarized, political affiliations against government supporters, affiliates, on issues of election reform laws. So the country was like, it's orange and blue. So either you are orange with the people who want election reforms, and either you're blue, you are with the government, you want the status quo. So the country was polarized, and here is women running for parliament. Okay, why you guys are running? There is a bigger issue. So always when a woman comes to something, there's a bigger issue. The national issue, you have to sacrifice, and you shouldn't run and disrupt this. But we decided, no, we have to run and make the voice. So when we got the number of votes in a polarized election, everybody was shocked. How on earth these women were able to get these votes? So they should be able to contribute to something. And the second election, we were able to win 4 of us and break through the social fabric. And it was not a joy for us, but it's amazing when you see the society, how was joyful. The whole society across Kuwait, from tribal areas to conservative areas to liberal areas, the whole nation. And actually, I remember when we won, after a month and a half election campaigning, which is a lot when you're campaigning day and night. And then we had to spend another month after that, not to rest, but just to adhere to the people who are celebrating, and you have to attend the celebration because everybody was celebrating. So the country was a joy, as if something new happened to the nation, and as if a turning point was going into the nation when women were in parliament. What did this happen? That now every government, because our governments are not elected, they're appointed, every cabinet, there have to be a woman, at least one, or there will be a backlash of society. How come this government doesn't have a woman? So inclusion also is you just force in. But another story, this is we had to fight a battle. But the most important, we don't have women in the judiciary system. And we don't have a law that forbids women to be a judge. But practices and social criteria exclude them. So when we were, as a parliamentarian, we said we have to close the democratic cycle. Women are in cabinet now. Women are in the legislative. We need women in the judiciary system, so we have to break it. And when we looked, we thought there is a law that we have to pass. It wasn't. There was no discrimination. But what it was is that the Justice Department, when they announced for the prosecutors who will be ending up judges, okay, they have the announcement said, men only. This post is for men only. And when we made a case against the Justice Department, so the ruling was that the law does not forbid, but society is not ready for women judges. And because of the religion background, the Islamization, and there is differences in does women in Islam should be a judge or not, we get into this. So we went to the head of the state as a parliamentarians, and speaking to the head of the state, our emir, and he said, how is your experience and what it is, and we kept telling him everything is fine. He said, how can we help as a government? We said, we want one thing. He said, what? We said, tell your justice minister to remove men only from that announcement. So capable women who are graduate from law schools can participate. And his response was, when you want to ask, you ask for the most difficult thing. And we said, this is what we want. We want the whole democratic, so Kuwait becomes real democratic. So it did in 2009, we were fighting and it didn't work out. In 2012, I was in cabinet member. So I went to my colleague, the justice lawyer, minister, and I said, now you're gonna have it. Please, can you make sure that the ad doesn't have this? No, Rola, you know, it's backlash, Islamists, you'd want me to get trouble with the Islamists. And I said, no. We had a prime minister who was very open, and he said, why not? I said, just open it. If you don't find a woman who's capable and meet the criteria, fine. But I'm not telling you recruit women, I'm just telling you give them the opportunity. And this is where we come back to issue of cohesion. Give them opportunities. So we came up, he had the ads. By the time women applied or something like that, we had a reshuffle of the cabinet. So we had a new justice department. I will finish. We had a new justice minister, and that one was extreme Islamist justice minister, who he came in power. So the applications were there, and the Supreme Court have already elected some, and some of them were women. Now he has to sign the recruitment and the appointment, and he found they are women, so he's not signing. And I went to him. While communication and networking is also important, and I kept telling him, I had a good relationship with him. I said, why not? He said, Rola, you know, it's my background, religion. I can't do this. It's against my beliefs. I said, but this is for the nation. It's not for you or your beliefs. So we came up with the prime minister to a compromise that when he is outside the country, there will be an acting minister, and at that time was a foreign minister who's liberal. He will sign the decree. And as if he didn't do it, but the woman. So we moved into this compromise. Compromising also gets you, instead of years of battle, also communication gets you to get people engaged also. And this is how women in Kuwait entered the judiciary system, and they are now in the path to become judges. So this is a quick things of different things. Some of it is long fights. Some of it just needs some good communication and networking in a small circle to move the society forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rola, and very powerful testimony there. And it really speaks to the tenacity that you need and sort of how slow change is, but that tenacity and real belief in what you're doing. Thank you for that. Miles, let's turn to you for a sort of academic perspective on this and what we know from the research that's been done by you and others and the research that we still need to do in order to promote cohesive societies.
Right, thank you, Emily. Well, all the other members of the panel have been doing interesting things with their lives. I've just been a drudge with the data, collecting more data, more robust data, subjecting it to more and more difficult tests. And I think that's really important because this is an area where the people are passionate about, people have very strong opinions, and my view is that without my data, I'm just another guy with an opinion. So let's start with diversity. If you have heard of one article, one academic article on diversity, I'll vouch that it's the article by Robert Putnam. Could you put your hand up if you've read that article? Don't be embarrassed, put your hand up. Okay, so, and the others of you have some reading to do. So some of you know this article. This article has had enormous impact, and unfortunately it's wrong. It's had an impact on leaders of this country, of the United States, of many Western European countries, and globally. This article comes to the pessimistic conclusion that living with diversity, for example, people living in diverse networks, in diverse neighborhoods, is associated with a reduction in trust towards other people. Trust towards members of ethnic outgroups, and somewhat paradoxically, also trust towards members of ethnic in-groups. That article, at best, we can say, was provocative and stimulating and led to an explosion of research on this important work. Don't bother to read that article. Read the meta-analysis published more recently of 70-odd studies on this topic, which shows that the conclusions drawn by the initial paper are wrong. They're far too pessimistic. Diversity does not lead necessarily to a reduction in trust. It does in some countries, it does with some measures, and so on. My own work has added a missing ingredient to that diversity debate, and it says it's no good looking simply at diversity. You need to look at whether people with diverse backgrounds actually interact with each other. If you would, for me, just look around this room today and see whether you're sitting with people you know already, look at who you intend to interact with during this conference. Until you've actually reached out and interacted with somebody that you didn't know already, who belongs, for example, to a different ethnic group or gender group or interest group, then you haven't exploited the opportunity, the opportunity that Nazir hinted at, that diversity has. It comes with challenges and it comes with great opportunities. Until I reach out and talk to an economist whose perspective is different from mine, I will not be aware of what a rich literature there actually is in economics about diversity, as well as in my field, social psychology. My missing ingredient is contact then, and our work shows very clearly that if you look at diverse neighbourhoods and you relate the amount of diversity in those neighbourhoods to levels of trust, there is, in British data, there is initially a negative association. So, just as Putnam concluded, it appears that people who live in more diverse neighbourhoods have lower levels of trust. Then you introduce to what is a complicated statistical model that I'm simplifying for you. Then you introduce this missing variable of contact, and you find that diversity is actually positively associated with contact, and contact is positively associated with trust. I'll give an example to rest you from the data for a second. Give an example that Emily gave to me earlier about her child who goes to a very diverse school. And in that diverse school, people typically don't pick up the opportunities for contact. So they are, as the phrase we often use in this literature, they are living apart together or living together apart. So contact is crucial. If you don't have contact, what happens? Well, contact has to be face-to-face to be most effective, but we also talk about extended or indirect forms of contact. I might not know somebody who is Malaysian, but I might have a friend who has a friend who is Malaysian. And even that rather weak tie turns out to have profound, significant effects on my levels of prejudice, tolerance, trust, and so on. If we don't promote contact, if we simply accept diversity as our goal, if we don't promote contact, we will be left with a policy dilemma. And Emily asked me to bring in the policy, and this is where I would bring in the policy. A lot of our work has gone beyond survey studies and said, when you go to a mixed school, when you go to a mixed organisation, do people actually mix? If I go back to Zara's initial question to us, which was a question about what social cohesion actually was. Well, for me, social cohesion is not just sharing the same space. It's interacting with each other, generating mutual trust, having mixed neighbourhoods, having not just bonding social capital with people of the same ethnic background as you, but also bridging social capital with people whose backgrounds is different from you. If you look at schools, and I've been doing a big project on Islamophobia in this country, and we've been doing a study in a city in the north of England which had riots in 2001, and very forward-thinking local planners in education decided to build some new schools. And those schools were, one of which, the most important one, was a planned ethnic merger. It took an existing white British school, an existing British Asian Muslim school, and it merged them in a new school. Beautiful new school, almost as beautiful as this building. Wonderful building. But it was like pouring a pint of milk in together with a pint of Guinness, which doesn't sound very appealing. The kids and the teachers in that school made it very appealing. They made it very successful. Those kids have learnt to live with each other. But there are some limits to that integration. If you observe them as I probably could observe you too at lunchtime, you'll see a pattern of resegregation. You'll see the people from this part of the world sitting and living together. You might see men eating together and women eating together, depending on how strong people's stereotypes are. And that's the same thing that happens in these schools. The white kids sit over here and the Asian kids sit over here. In our schools, we've got to do much more than open the door and welcome these people from different groups. If I think of what was said earlier about the vernacular schools, the vernacular schools, of course, don't even give this mixing a chance. But when you promote mixed schooling, don't think that the job is done just by creating a mixed school. You've got to promote it, you've got to change norms, you've got to introduce ways to encourage people and reward people for mixing. I think I've probably used up my 5 minutes. You can see that despite the fact that I claim to be a drudge with data, I'm also very passionate about this. I believe that diversity is a fantastic opportunity, but we must grasp it with both hands and do our utmost to promote it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, all of you. I'd now like to open up to other people, I'm sure, who feel just as passionately about this topic. It's something we can all relate to and all need to relate to. We've got 2 microphones, I think. So I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. If you'd make your questions succinct, time is flying. So briefly introduce, say who you are and your question, please. Gentleman here. We're going to be diverse in our questions. I need a lady here. So gentleman there, and then any ladies in the audience. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for fantastic perspectives, and I think the question of cohesive and diverse societies is around in the last couple of years. My name is Željko Ivanović. I'm working with Open Science Foundations, and my question for those who would like to answer, I mean, it was more obvious in the political struggle in Kuwait, the question of power in how we actually build diversity and cohesiveness, when diversity and cohesiveness is not high on the agenda of what national interest is. So building these power structures that give a structural opportunity for not only whether societies are cohesive or diverse, they are by default by diversity among individual people, but how the terms of this diversity and cohesion are actually defined and whether people have a structural opportunity to get engaged in the microcosmos of schools. And Miles was part of our discussions in Open Science Foundations based on his experience. We know that disaggregation of schools in which Roma children of single ethnicity are segregated are lower in quality. But when you disaggregate the schools, the role of a teacher, who is the prime power figure, or school principal, is crucial to arrange not only a contact but experience of different people with different backgrounds.
Great, thank you. So good question there on power and how we actually change things and the role of leadership as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bring the mic down to this lady at the front.
My name is Levent Tuzun. I was a student here 2 years ago, and now I work for the International Development Bank. I have 2 questions. May I be permitted to ask both? They're very
Give
brief.
it to one and then perhaps come back.
Sure.
Thank you. And thank you for asking permission and not just launching into the 2. I appreciate it.
The first one I'll ask is about financial inclusion and its contribution to cohesion in society. I happened to work with a Malaysian fintech startup a short while ago, and their product was very much based on the premise of financial inclusion and literacy. And they saw it as a tool that literally facilitates some of the wealth creation and transfer that our first speaker talked about. What are some of your observations, both from a business perspective and a government perspective, on the benefits of financial inclusion and actually spending time and effort and money to increase it?
Great, thank you. And the third question?
My name is Shadia Nayati, and I'm working for the Office of External Affairs of the Baha'i community in Italy and in the UK. So my question would be, how can the government promote, any of your governments really, promote opportunities for religious and ethnic minorities to create more cohesive societies? So what can be the role of minorities in fostering cohesion in society?
And have you got any particular thoughts yourself on the government policies?
I'd actually like to hear what.
Yeah, because we've talked quite a bit about education. Maybe we should start with that question.
Thank
I think
you.
we've touched quite a bit on education. Are there other areas of government policy that you think need prioritising? Perhaps we'll go in the same order as our speakers spoke. Nazir, if you'd like to pick up on some of these questions.
Yeah.
Maybe the financial inclusion one.
Yeah, just quickly, I'll pick up on the first two if I could.
Sure.
Firstly, on the power structure and leadership on the topic of diversity, I think we should somewhere discuss the tension between democracy and diversity. And, if you look at the Sri Lanka situation where, once the Sinhalese government gets into place, there's no representation for the Tamils. For instance. So if you take democracy in the sort of basic, I hate to say this inverted commas, American sense, which is one person, one vote, then it's dangerous. It's downright dangerous for managing diversity. So then you then need to go into the whole ask about constitutions and the whole political economic system design to make sure that minorities are properly protected. Two, in terms of financial inclusion and integration, absolutely. I think certainly if you talk about inclusion and poverty, definitely there's a lot that can be done by the government to intervene, to create more opportunities, to channel funds in the right direction. And here is where Malaysia is struggling again, which is the tension between our affirmative action policies and the reality of where poverty lies. Yeah.
So just to come back on this affirmative action, because I think it touched on the third question, which is what government should do, because you already talked earlier about phasing it out. At the same time, you've talked about the need to empower minorities and those who don't have wealth. And so is it about redesigning the affirmative action policy, or is it about ending the affirmative action?
No, I think it is about, America has affirmative action policies. I think there's nothing wrong with affirmative action policies. You just have to make sure that it's relevant for that moment in time, the requirements of the economy and society. And secondly, you have to protect it from abuse. It's the most easily abused weapon of government.
And like you said earlier, it can actually reinforce segregation rather than actually end it and empower minorities.
Correct. I mean, just basic point is we introduced an affirmative action policy in 1971. It's a 20-year policy. It's now 45 years. It's still going on.
Great. Thank you. Sabariah.
Thank you, Emily. I would like to comment on the last two. Yeah, I think I tend to agree with the Dato Nazir regarding the how the government can promote their ethnic society for fostering integration. I believe that this is the leadership and the political will. If you don't have the leadership which believe that we have to integrate or we have to collaborate, then I think that whatever plan that you develop, it cannot be, materialized. So one thing is about but we are very lucky and fortunate in my country that we have a good leadership and we have the political will so that we can assure that whatever policy that we have promote or we develop, we will act into it. So another one is in terms of the financial inclusion, within the government and the private sector or the public sector. The public sector are more looking at maybe at the middle income, but government will look also into the Ministry of Women. We are looking into the B40, the bottom 40, meaning that these people are quite, we call it poor, poor. So there's a lot of policy, the program that we developed to help the poor people, how to empower them in terms of economic and social, so that they can, they are not only waiting from the government to get their sort of some token money, whatever, but they also can generate income. We help them in terms of funding, provide them with the training, and this actually when they have this, you call it the skill and the training, I think they can move forward for them to get involved in the policy of the government. And also, we are not looking in terms of, as I said earlier, that we don't go on the races or the minority, but we are looking more on terms of the who should we have. We give priority to the poor people for the ministry. Yeah, under my ministry, we are looking at the poor people priority. It's not the other part, the other society. We don't look, but the priority is to help the poor people how to manage their economy or to empower them so that they can be inclusive in our 11 Malaysia plan.
Then by targeting the poor, you're actually
Yes,
bringing in that.
yes, and the government provide a lot of fund to help the minority, even the indigenous group, a woman especially, so that they can develop SME and whatnot. So I think that in terms of economy, we really look in terms of the because we believe in diversity. So everybody involved in our economy without prejudice or what belief or what race you are in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rola, do you want to take up this question about power structures as well and how you empower?
Yes. I think it's very important that the nation building, the public institutions itself are strong. That these public institutions are the providers of services, municipal services, infrastructures that serves everybody. So that the citizen itself is allegiance to the state, not to the ethnic group or the religious or the tribe, which they are the providers of the services. So you need to break, you need to strengthen your public institutions so you feel that public funds are distributed evenly, you are recognized as a group by the state, not by the your people who are. And election law are very important, especially when you get communities or countries which are small, because election law, if they are tailored towards this area will be elected from this type of tribal, or this area is elected from this type of a group, ethnic group, or this familiar group, or something like that, then the allegiance becomes the voters goes to this group as if they are the providers of their services. And you start breaking the state itself. And so you need to strengthen the rule of law, saying the public institutions are the ones who are the providers, and you bring the citizen to become allegiant. So the power should be the state power that distributes to everybody. So you start to feel belonging if you are a woman, or you are a special need, or you are from this ethnic group or something like that. You don't go. So this becomes government leaders becomes their servant to the state, to the people, not they serve me, but whenever they take a decision, it doesn't, they take the decision only, as Nazir was saying, this ethnic group, because I'm in power, so I serve this group and isolate everybody else, and everybody else marginalized. But if you have strong public institutions, rule of law, that gives the opportunity to everybody, and where everybody speaks about their existence, when there is limited opportunities, and especially economic opportunities, then everybody cries. Because everybody wants to take this limited. So you as a state and leadership needs to create a big cake and a big pie that everybody can feel that can have access to it. But in a limited pie, and you wanted to focus your eye on only this, how to distribute a small limited pie, you'll always find some people will be marginalized. So you as a leadership and in power, you need to think of how I can create a bigger cake so everybody can have a share of it, and the opportunities are available to everybody.
It sounds like two things there. One is strong state institutions, but secondly, thinking about how we draw electoral boundaries, yes, and making sure they don't coincide with specific, yes, groups. Miles, your thoughts on this?
Very briefly, a response to the first question, the important issue of power. I'm glad you raised that because I wanted to mention one possible downside of promoting contact, and that is where contact for minority group members has what are called sedative effects. It blunts the inclination to take collective action in favour of your group, which is discriminated against. And the aim of contact shouldn't be to create some kind of false consciousness where people are no longer aware of those disparities. I want to emphasise that any attempt to promote cohesion, contact, etc., must take place in a context of social justice. And in fact, we know from empirical work, we know that one of the strongest enemies of contact is the experience of discrimination. If you seek to promote contact, but you do this with people who have themselves experienced discrimination, contact is less effective and sometimes ineffective. The second issue I wanted to raise very briefly, other areas of priority. Housing. Housing is a great priority. I'd love to do a study in Singapore, which I know allocates housing by proportion of ethnic group members. When I last visited Singapore, I was told by most people that they didn't think that allocation seriously promoted much interaction between members of different ethnic groups. They lived in the same place, but they didn't interact with each other. How do we get beyond that mere diversity? Nazir mentioned sport. He's going to regret mentioning that because he's a Chelsea supporter and I'm an Arsenal supporter. But the thing that both those clubs do, and lots of other Premiership clubs do, is they model diversity. There isn't a successful Premier League team today that is not diverse, which is why the bananas that he referred to have been put away, and people support their team members wherever they come from. I also mentioned something that we don't do that many things right in the university, but we have this program called Athena Swan, which some of you may have heard of, which promotes the advancement of women. It's tremendous what you can do by making rules that people have to follow. We now have to support the advancement of women. We have to show that we're doing it in all sorts of different ways. And there is a real lever to making us do that, which is that if you don't show that you're doing this and you go through a bronze and a silver up to a gold level, if you don't do it, you are ineligible to receive certain national funds. That's a way to change people's behaviour. Finally, because I know we have to end, we've talked a lot about multiple identities. And I want to emphasize that from the view of a social psychologist, we are all entirely capable of having multiple identities, just as we are capable of speaking multiple languages. We switch on and we switch off those identities in different settings. Nobody should be asked to support, for example, the Malaysian national identity if they give up one of their other identities. That's not necessary. We have multiple identities. This was beautifully expressed as today is the first day of the new international cricket season in this country. This is beautifully expressed by a gentleman called the Nawab of Pataudi, a former, any Indians here in the audience? Do you know who he is? A former Indian cricket captain. When he took over that team, the members of the team came from all sorts of different areas of India. They kept themselves to themselves. They spoke their regional languages. They sat together. They even ate their own food. And he said to these guys, "You are not playing for Delhi, Punjab, Madras, Calcutta, or Bombay. You are playing for India. You are Indian." And that's the identity for that moment, but it doesn't mean giving up the other identities for other moments.
Excellent, thank you. We have 3 minutes. I'm going to suggest we have one last question. Someone's already got their hand up and anticipated the opening up of the floor. So we'll give you the mic. I think we could have had a very fruitful discussion for longer. And I wish we'd had the chance.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
My name is Montserrat Gibernau. I'm a visiting fellow at Magdalene College here in Oxford. I was listening to all of you and talking about diversity. It seems to me that the first question is, what do we mean by diversity? Because of all these different policies, of all these different views in which we mention the word diversity, it seems to me that we've been referring to different aspects of what's diversity. Are we meaning diversity ethnic groups? Are we meaning different traditions? Are we meaning different senses of belonging, different values, social, political, religious? I think one has to really say what angle one is using when analyzing diversity. Otherwise, the strength of diversity per se could mean many different things to many different people.
And that brings us very nicely back to actually the starting point, which was Zara's question, which was what does cohesion practically mean and what are the tangible hallmarks, which is almost the sort of flip side of your question. And I'm going to ask our panelists, I'm going to give them a very tough...
Could I say something very brief?
Okay, very brief. Because
it's very brief. When we talk about diversity, in the times of crisis as now, I think it's very difficult to find, in some occasions, what the limits of tolerance are regarding diversity. I was wondering whether anybody would be able to comment on that. Thank you.
The limits of tolerance. Perhaps you can weave that into your tough task I'm going to ask you, which is one sentence on the hallmarks of a diverse society. And perhaps you can think about in that the limits of tolerance. Okay, well, let's go in reverse order to put Miles on the spot.
Thanks for that. For me, it's a tolerant, unprejudiced society, a trusting society, where you build trust through your mutual interactions, where there is contact rather than segregation. Do I think there are limits of tolerance? I actually don't think there are. I think it's a matter of the social context in which you put it, the leadership you have from the school heads, as that nice example was given, from the leaders of industry and government. I don't think there are a priori limits on that tolerance.
Right, Rola.
I'll just add to what was said by Miles. Belonging, participation, having equal opportunity, you're recognized, and the legitimacy.
Great, thank you. Sabariah.
For me, diversity means gender differences, economy. It can be also economy, social, and also ages. I think I agree with what she mentioned just now. It's all inclusive, and the limit of tolerance is depend on the country. I mean, in terms of how you are bringing. So some people their tolerance is. Our tolerance is higher, some is a little bit. But when it comes to racism, I think that nobody can tolerate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Nazir, last word to you.
No, I think all of the above. But I think, as I mentioned just now, what is important in terms of judging cohesion and success is, I think, a continuous understanding of levels of engagement, particularly of the minorities. And I mentioned to you earlier about the survey that we did, or someone did in 2013. And that gives you a good sense of the situation in Malaysia. And I think, I'm working together with Miles to do more surveys to really understand where people are on this, because I think from there, you can then come up with the right set of interventions from the private sector or the government in terms of how to bring society better and achieve one's goals. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we've had four very thoughtful speakers who've shared many of their personal experiences. And I'd really like to thank you for the candid and thoughtful reflections and insights.